What's up, guys? This is Andrew Wright with another Review the Right Thing. We're going to be talking about some more music today. I'm really excited to talk about music, even though I'm really excited to talk about it all. I wouldn't be on here talking to the entire world if I didn't like talking about these things. So really, any of the above, music, movies. I haven't done any game reviews yet because it's kind of hard to do those. I have too much else going on, so I do toys instead, because they're just as much fun. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the new Moses Sumney album, Grae. Moses Sumney is an American singer and songwriter from California. He incorporates elements of rock, R&B, folk, and art pop to kind of blend into his unique mix of sound. Grae's lyrics thematically involve issues of identity, relationship, anxiety, self-isolation, which I think kind of would play into that anxiety a little bit. But he uses these themes to beautifully and poetically tell a modern story of how these things affect him and even apply to other people in, the black community around him. When I was kind of starting to write this review, I wanted to be politically correct, obviously, so I was going to say African-American singer-songwriter. But there's songs in here that kind of blatantly talk about labels and how we as people should just be more aware of these labels and kind of keep them more at the forefront of our brain. Because these labels, I think, maybe are very harmless in certain regards, but are also, they can put a stigma on something just in the back of our head, really. Like, you might not think it's a negative thing, but just because of how we were wired and how we've been raised to process these things over the years, there's a lot of things that are just so ingrained, and even the most non-racist of us still has racist tendencies. Unless you think about them and are constantly trying to overcome that, some things I think are just we have this bias that we just kind of go back to. Obviously, it's just something that you'll just get better on as we grow into a better society, a more caring society, a more loving society that doesn't look at these labels and immediately think negative in a way. Black, transgender, anxiety, mental illness, like these are all things that are almost just pushed under the rug in our society, and it's just like, we'll worry about these tomorrow. This is what's important today. And it's like, no, like these issues are very important now, and I think this is what Moses is trying to bring about in these songs and kind of put at the forefront of people's minds so that you think about these things. And like I said, not even just racial things, but also with relationships and mental illness. There are many spoken word tracks sprinkled throughout the 20 songs. And the album opens up with one called Insula, which is all about isolation and the meaning of the word insula, how it also means island, but insula is the word for isolation, I believe. I'd have to go back and look at the lyrics again. But anyways, it's just an interesting opener that talks about this feeling that people have, when they almost feel cut off from everything else. They're the black sheep. They are the outcast. You begin to develop this feeling that you're just alone. I believe that that's what this song really talks about and kind of tries to dive into. Song Cut Me, which is one of the singles off of the album, is the next track. I really love this song. This is where you kind of start to see Moses kind of going in a new direction with his music. You can obviously tell that this is going to be something different from a romanticism, whereas a romanticism is a lot more intimate, stripped back, just him and a guitar, maybe him and a guitar and a slight drum beat. This has got a lot more to it. It's still trying to be very minimalistic with its approach, but he adds horns, he might add some keys, some different strings in different areas. And this song uses more of the horns. He's got a trumpet player on this album. This song opens up into something a little bit more intimate again, but then adds in the trumpet, and with the chorus then kind of all bringing together all of its elements then, and the song kind of just booms a little bit more than previous work. I think this is a really great song off the album. For it to be technically the first song on the album, I think it's a great opener. Right after it kind of gets you thinking a little bit, kind of drops this idea in your mind with the spoken word opener, and then hits you with Cut Me, and it's just kind of like, this is a nice little, okay, this is where we're So we're going with this album, huh? Next song, In Bloom, is where we kind of start to touch on a little bit more of our relationship themes. This song being more about two people getting very mixed messages, very platonic relationship, but one another sees themselves as trying to be a pursuer, so they are kind of weary and keeping their distance, and then at the end they realized they were just looking for somebody to confide in. Neither of them were looking for anything sexual or romantic. They just wanted to talk, and it was really just a song about how the whole thing was just mixed up from the beginning, and totally wrong ideas were sent. But then they came to a mutual understanding and realized that this is more platonic. And I just wanted somebody to talk to. You know, can't you have that? I didn't have to just want to sleep with you. This song uses some really nice guitar work and some really pretty piano work. It's a great song. The next songs in the album are almost like an arc, and I feel like they kind of really play off of each other in a way. Viral deals with masculinity and what it means to be a man, maybe even what it means to be a black man. That gets a certain, when you think about that, there's a certain image, I guess, that you think of. And I think Childish Gambino really talks about this a lot too, how he doesn't identify with we perceive as the typical black male, I guess. He would be more in line with, I guess, a Caucasian person, feelings and what they are into and their likes and interests and stuff like that, but he's very much in the middle, and so he's not cool enough for, or masculine enough for the black men, but then for us white people, we just, he's just not accepted because he's different, and that's just, again, that problem with race that we still deal with, all these years later, and it's just crazy. And with Conveyor, I think that's kind of also pushing into that he wanted to march to a beat of a different drum, not even just being an African-American male, but more in the sense that just different in general. Everybody kind of does this one thing, everything day in and day out is the same. We wake up, go to work, eat, sleep, bam, done. He's the outcast, he's kind of like the black sheep, and he wants to do something different. He knows that, and so he's kind of separated himself to do something different, and how he compares atypical life of just the normal grind of Monday through Friday as being like a worker bee. And so you're living this mundane existence, and then once you've fulfilled your thing, you're just going to die and it's going to all be over. And it's just this circle. He wants to kind of do something different and not be a part of that. He doesn't feel like he's a part of that. And then, which everything flows into then Boxes, which is another spoken word track on the album, which really talks about like how we as a people categorize different things, and we throw these labels on them and we throw them in these boxes, and that is just how we always identify with those things. And it's important for us to get out of that mindset, because it's 2020 and we need to accept people for who they are, but not just race or sexual orientation or any kind of identity or mental issues or anything like that. Like, it's important to not put these labels on them, because I believe that when we do, even if we're not trying to spin any kind of negative light on it, there ends up being this kind of negative stigma with it. For instance, with, I guess if you just think of black male, you have this certain image of masculine guy, thug. That's just something that you just need to get away from. That's just not true. People are people, and you can't just identify somebody based on one characteristic. You can't just say, oh, he's a gay man, and think, well, everything's going to be XYZ from here. Well, no, because he's still a human being. There's still so much more that makes up him as a person, and not just this one thing. And so it's important to look at him as a human being and not just the obvious, or judge the book by its cover, basically. Look at the whole picture, There's so much more that you're not seeing, and you're just picking the one or two things to identify them by. and then we throw them in like these boxes. Gagarin uses these really weird auto-tuned low vocals that I think are awesome. Totally remind me of something that came off of the Gautier album, and it was probably one of the coolest songs off that album at the time. That album really didn't do that well anyways, because it wasn't all somebody that you used to know. But honestly, I thought that Gautier album was pretty good. And this song reminds me of a track off of there where he also uses these really washed out low vocals, and they're unlike anything else on the album, and it's totally cool. Comes out of Left Park. Jack and Jill, another spoken word song that I think again kind of touches on this thematic issue that we're talking about throughout the album, about identity and what comes along with it, being black, how masculinity, how that kind of plays into it, his isolation as a result of it, just his how he identifies and how he feels about the whole situation as he progresses through life and how he adapts to it. It's all done with this spoken word between him and these lyrics from a Jill Scott album or song off of one of her earlier works. Color opens up with this awesome saxophone instrumental done by French Kiwi Juice, I believe was what his name is. He's a French DJ. Also accompanied by Shabaka Hutchings from Shabaka and the Ancestors later on in the song. I'll get back to some other features that I actually missed from the beginning, but this album's got a ton of people on it, which is awesome. Anyways, this song's really awesome. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about before with the idea of being a black man means, and that, I guess those certain characteristics that immediately come to mind, and how we put that label on it, but how we shouldn't. And, there's so much more to that person that you can't just put that one stigma on it, or that one idea on it, or that one label on it. It has to be something, you have to look at it more from a bigger picture, more broader picture. And so it's in Color that I think he's kind of talking about this, and how you should see more color in your life. Just be more open-minded. It then goes into another spoken word track called Also, and. Sorry, God, that was really weird to say all that in a row. But anyways, again, this kind of just deals with identity and the multiple, not personalities per se, but the multiple things that kind of just incorporate and make you. You can't just identify the one or two things. We as the world are a melting pot of people and culture and ideas, and if you're not closed-minded and you let yourself open to those things, you become a lot of that too, and you're a mixed batch of all of your influence essentially. And so how it's important to not just label the one thing and look at it from more of a broader picture. You can't just say that book is brown. If you open that book up, there's just so much more to it. Neither Nor, the next song, kind of finds Moses kind of going back to his roots. This song definitely feels like more of the more rock, folk-oriented tracks on the album. It's still very grand in sound with its use of harp and its very strummed guitar medley. Before Polly, it basically goes back to just totally stripped down, very intimate acoustic. The last two songs being very much about relationships. Polly being more of the, I think you can kind of take it in two different ways. It has a lyric about, if I split myself in two, would you love me more? Which could hint at polygamy, and she's interested in dating multiple people, or not she, I can't really just assume, because obviously it's a universal song. This can go for anybody, so this is a sexless thing, so I shouldn't have said she. So anyways, how they would be more interested in having relationships with multiple people, or like I was saying before with opening that book, and there's just so much more into it, and you have to take the good with the bad, or you have to take everything, the whole package. You can't just have one thing without the other. So when he says, if I split myself in two, would you love me more? To me, it feels like, would you want to pick, you can't just pick the one thing about me that you like, do you like using me as arm candy just to show off, when we go out dancing, or do you actually like to dance with me, or do you just like to dance? Insinuating that, do you just like the having relationship and being with somebody, and it's not necessarily me that you care about, it's just the idea of being with somebody is what's important to you. So, and I think that's what this song tackles. Either way, it being more about relationships, and this is kind of the more tender points of the album, which is kind of weird because to me these songs would fit almost better on part 2, which would make part 2 longer, which is just beautiful because part 2 is just so good as well, and we'll get to that, but they just don't feel like the rest of the album, and I think maybe he was trying to do that on purpose, is kind of like ending the album in a certain way to say, give us a taste for what he was going to do on part 2 a couple months down the line, because part 1 came out back in, I think, February, early April, something like that. I'd have to go back and look. And then this album just dropped a couple weeks ago, part 2, so then they released the whole thing together. Obviously, part 1 being available for a while, you could stream it for a bit now. So I've been able to dive into it quite a bit. And now I've recently picked it up in vinyl, been spinning part 2 quite a bit. And they're both really great. The only thing I'd say about part 2 is it's just too short. And I just want more. By the time I was done listening to part 2 as by itself, it's just like, ugh, I want more. But it's important. I think this album really plays out better when you listen to it as a whole, and not just 2 parts. Two Dogs opens up Grae Part 2, which, like I stated, with Polly and with Neither Nor, these songs are all very intimate and use very minimal uses of arrangements and are very lush. Two Dogs has this very pretty flute played within the song, accompanied by some very soft keys. Bystanders then opening up the next track with a lot more a cappella opening, kind of going back to more of his roots when he did a lot more a cappella stuff in his youth, later on incorporating more elements of folk when he started playing the guitar. Me in 20 Years follows Bystanders, and this is one of the tracks that feels like it actually should be on part 1, much like Polly and Neither Nor should be on part 2. It's a much bigger song than everything on the album, or on this second half. Features some very grand orchestration, very booming sound to the whole song, but fits into the second half because I think the second half deals more with relationships. And this song being about how, you know, he's struggled with this idea of being alone and how he's lacked romantic interaction throughout his life, but how he's curious what his fate will lead up to in 20 years, and will he still be in the same boat? Will he still be alone and isolated from the connections of people, or in this case, a romantic relationship? Which then segues to Keeps Me Alive, goes back into another very intimate song, more stripped down. It does have some very pretty choral arrangements that kind of keep it sounding a little bit more grand, but also kind of keeping it more lighter like the rest of this part is. And so this kind of segues into what he was talking about. It keeps him alive, the curiosity, you know, the fact that he has seen love at one point keeps him hopeful that maybe there's something in the future, and that maybe the future isn't so grim. Lucky Me again, then going even more stripped down and more intimate, back to his early beginnings, again following that theme of being lucky that he has seen love in this world in some place. You know, he's the imprint of that person is still in his bed, and he can still be at peace that, you know, he has been able to experience at least some kind of love somewhere, and hopefully he's able to find that again. And so I Come to Isolation is where the album kind of comes full circle, and the ideas from the first track, Insula, on part 1 are kind of brought back to this track, and like I said, just kind of brings everything to a whole. Each album might have its own overlying themes, how they again make up this book that I've been talking about, and it's not just one or the other, it's a whole package, much like we as people are a whole package and you can't just pick one thing or another. Bless Me then being about, again, I think that relationship that he has been talking about within this whole second half, and how, you know, it's amazing that somebody was able to love him for who he was. They were able to show him a little bit that it's possible for somebody to love him for who he is, even though he may struggle with how he, you know, feels about himself. Before You Go finishes off the second half with more spoken word, again talking about love and why we try to grasp this concept so much, even though basically in the end we're all destined to die. Why is this so important to us while we're here on this earth? Because when we die, depending on how you believe, maybe you think that, you're going to spend eternity together in some heaven, but, he obviously believes that once we die, nothing else happens to us, and so why do we grasp this thing that in the end is just inevitable and we're going to expire on this earth? And I think it's a really cool concept, and gets you thinking. Depending on how you look at things, you might have a very good answer to this, or you might not. I was raised in a very religious household, but in my adulthood, I can say I'm more of a spiritual person. The idea of religion doesn't really apply to me, or appeal to me, I guess, and so I'm more of a good and bad type, I guess. Just treat everybody with respect. It's basically the most important thing. You get further with honey than you do with vinegar. It's something my mother used to say. And so I've just always kind of lived my life like that. I'm feeling a pretty good 10 on this album. I think overall, as the whole 20 tracks, this album is just incredible. I don't think you can separate one part into the other part and review them separately, because part 2 just isn't long enough. And whereas I think part 2 is amazing just on its own anyways, it just leaves me wanting more. The way some of the tracks may have been arranged too would also, kind of lead me to think, well, part 2 just doesn't work by itself. And so as a whole album, this album is just fantastic. Thematically tackles a lot of issues that are important to today and very meaningful. I just think it's just overall, I thought it was an incredible album. The only other thing I've been feeling this year that I could have rated a 10, may have been that Ulcerate and that Oranzi Pazuzu. But this one I'm definitely feeling like, after diving into it and exploring its themes so much and really listening to it, I love this album, the way he's produced it. Like I said, there's so many guest people on here too. One Otrix Point Never does so much of the production on the album, which is really awesome. Thundercat plays on multiple tracks. So I mean, this album is just incredible. There's no other way to slice it. But it also leads me to think that, I've listened to those other albums too that I just mentioned, like the Ulcerate and the Oranzi Pazuzu, quite a bit. That's why I don't like to review things with like a grading, because I feel different ways about different things after listening to them over and over and over again. That Joyner Lucas that I reviewed earlier in the year, I really liked it when I first heard it, but upon listening to it more often and really diving into it, I realized that it was just good at the surface level, and when you dove deeper, there just wasn't any substance, nothing to really hold everything together. But then other albums you listen to more and more, and you're just like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I may have hated it before, but now I really understand it. And so it's just hard to put a grade on things sometimes. But like I said, I'm definitely feeling a 10 on this album. So anyways, did you guys love it? Did you hate it? Do you guys ever listen to things that you like 1 minute, but then don't like the next, and then vice versa? You hate it at the first listen, and then repeated listenings, you end up falling in love with it. Let's talk about those albums in the comments. And if you like, click subscribe, click the little bell. It'll notify you every time I put up more content. Look forward to seeing more videos from me. And this has been Review the Right Thing. Thanks a lot.